Hey everyone, I hope you're having a great day. Today, I want to spend a little time talking about the 4th edition game system license. This is something that got a lot of bad press when 4th edition was released, and it still is looked back on as something that was a reason why 4th edition didn't succeed. So I've always been curious about whether it's one of those things that just gets a bad rap and people have perpetuated this idea of it being terrible, or was it something that was actually not very good? So because you never know with 4th edition, there's a lot of things that come along with 4th edition that people say were bad, but they really weren't that bad. But then people that haven't really played the game just kind of perpetuate that. So was this one of those things? That's always what's been in the back of my mind. So I wanted to look at it. So I went and found all of the different documents that related to the game system license for 4th edition. I spent a lot of time looking through them and trying to give my interpretation of what they meant, my understanding of them, whether it was the spirit of it or the actual letter of the legal text that's in there. And so I just wanted to share my thoughts on that with everybody, and then be curious what you think and what your experiences with are, and how you interpret it. Naturally, getting started in this, I am by no means a copyright lawyer or a lawyer of any kind. This is simply my interpretation, my understanding of what I'm seeing. So do not take anything that I'm giving here as a legal interpretation, as something official. I do not represent Wizards or anything like that. So if you need something that's official, go to a lawyer, talk to a lawyer, get them to look at the documents and give you their thoughts. So let's just get that out of the way right away. The other thing is that, while this is really focused on the license and what you can do with this license and whether it's good or bad, which may apply more to content creators, because if you're not a content creator, then it doesn't really make any difference. You can play the game however you want, but if you're talking about making content, that's where this stuff comes into play. So if you're not a content creator, then that aspect of it may not mean very much to you. But for me, I look at this as more from a historical perspective of 4th edition as a game, and looking into the reasons why it wasn't as successful as other versions. And I think this is a part of it. So I'm always intrigued at some of these details, and that's kind of why I dug into it. And I am also interested in creating content for it. So that was another angle for me. But I think there's two sides to it. So there's looking at it from that historical context as well as from a content creator context. So let's run through it and see, I'll give you my thoughts on what I found as I went through all these documents. And then if you've got some other interpretations, other thoughts on it, definitely chime in the comments and let me know what you think with it. I'd be very interested to see what the different perspectives are for this. So, before I jump into that though, I want to give a little bit of, context for the licensing in general. And I know for a lot of those watching, this might be, common knowledge, but I feel like it's important to just kind of lay some of the groundwork that, the prior to 4th edition, we obviously had 3rd edition and 3.5, which came out in, 3rd edition came out in 2000. And 3rd edition was a major revamping of Dungeons and Dragons. So what you had in 2nd edition and in the earlier editions was greatly changed in 3rd edition, and 3rd edition much more resembles what we know of now as D&D than what it did before. There's a lot of stuff that changed. The whole D20 system came about in 3rd edition, and so it was a huge overhaul of the game, and really streamlined the rules in a way that we hadn't seen before. And I would argue that the changes that you got in 3rd edition were as great as the changes that we then got in 4th edition, meaning that if you played 2nd edition and you were moving to 3rd edition, that was a huge shift in how the game was played. And then obviously if you went from 3rd edition to 4th edition, another huge shift. So I think they were the same, but 3rd edition and 3.5, much more successful, to the point where they're still played extensively today. than 4th edition, where you don't have that same level of play today. And it obviously, the game itself was really only around for say 4 years or so before we moved on to 5th edition, or before they announced that they were going to go to 5th edition. So, you know, what was the issue there? And I think this license is kind of a key part of that. With 3rd edition, you got the open game license, which is still used today for 3rd edition 3.5. And up until they released the Creative Commons, it was used for 5th edition. And this license allowed people to make content for the game. And so the natural question is, well, what is an open license versus a closed license? And this was an open license. And the essence of that is, it provided you with a piece of content in the form of the system reference document, and basically said, here, this is yours. You do with it whatever you want. We are gifting this to you. As long as you follow these rules, you can use this content however you like and publish your own content using it and everything like that. There aren't really many restrictions on what you can do with this content. And those system reference documents were very complete in that they contained descriptions from the classes, from the races, spells, monsters, items, feats. So you got a lot of details about everything. You didn't just get a name of something or anything. You actually got a stat block for a monster. You actually got stat blocks for the spells and all that. And you could then use those in your content however you wanted. And so that's open. You were completely kind of free to do what you wanted with that. As we found last year, there's questions about whether it was revocable and all of that, but you pretty much were free to do what you wanted. And this allowed people to create games like Dungeon Crawl Classics, Castles and Crusades. Eventually it led to Pathfinder. And, you know, because it was open, you were allowed to you could layer your stuff on top of that and have your way with it. And that was good. A closed license, by contrast, gives you access to some content, but then kind of restricts what you can do with that content. And so you don't really have control over what you can do with that content. You're really having to work within much tighter constraints than you can with the open license. So when 3rd edition comes out with its open license, you get all these great people publishing modules, and you got Paizo engaged to publish the Dungeon and Dragon magazines, and the whole community is making all kinds of great content for that game, and it becomes super popular. So Wizards of the Coast kind of sees this, and I feel like as they go to 4th edition, they're like, no, we need to get this under control. We want to be able to control this content. We want to make the money from this content. And we already talked about how you kind of saw this when they were redoing the open game license, or tried to redo the open game license last year. They were trying to follow the same playbook of saying, no, we don't want everybody to be able to make stuff. We want to do it all ourselves and bring it under our control. And so we had already been down that road with 4th edition. So what leads to this game license for 4th edition is they cancel their contract with Paizo. So Paizo is no longer able to publish the Dungeon and the Dragon magazine. And then they start putting out this feeler for this new license for 4th edition that says there's going to be restrictions about what you can publish. If you decide to publish for 4th edition, you can only publish for 4th edition. You can't publish for 3rd edition and 4th edition. You can't make a module that is 3rd edition and also the same module in 4th edition. You have to choose. And early on, there was even a restriction that said that if you have 3rd edition stuff under the open game license and you decide to publish 4th edition stuff, you can sell your current inventory of 3rd edition stuff, but once that inventory is gone, you can only publish the 4th edition stuff. So they were drawing that line in the sand saying you cannot do both. You have to choose. And their desire likely was to either get people to publish in 4th edition only so that they could pretend the other edition didn't exist and everybody would move on to 4th edition, or to lock people out so that they were the only ones making 4th edition content and they could control all that stuff, which is why when they cut off the contract for Dungeon and Dragon magazine from Paizo, they brought it in-house. Wizards of the Coast started publishing that magazine themselves, and so there was a shift in who actually owned that magazine. And so that was kind of the way things transpired. So what happens is, fourth edition is coming out, we now have this game system license, and now we get to the question is, how is it? Is it any good? Is it actually junk like what you hear? What could you do with it if you wanted to? And that's what I want to kind of get into now. So I'm going to flip over and let me go to a different screen here, and let's take a look at some of the details of this license. So this is the actual this is the license itself, and there's two versions of this. And so on the left side is the version that was released originally. This version was released in June of 2008, right after fourth edition was published. So the first books for fourth edition came out on June 6th, I believe. And this was published on June 17th. And so that's the license that everybody first saw and that people got up in arms over, because there is something that we'll get to in a second where you'll see it. On the right side is the license that was published in February of 2009. And this is the most recent license, game system license that we have. And you'll notice just from looking at the screen that they both look identical, at least on page one. Now this license is 7 pages long. By comparison, the open game license is 2 pages long. So this clearly goes into a lot more detail. But, there's a couple things that are there. There's really one key difference between these two documents. Most of it is the same between the things. But I was talking a second ago about how there was this restriction on what you could publish. If you wanted to use this license and publish fourth edition content, what you had to do if you were also publishing third edition content. And that was referred to as Section 6. And so if we scroll down here, and you can see that, once again, they're mostly the same. There's some minor differences in here, and I'll check out a couple things on this page, and we'll come back to it in a second. But I really want to talk about this Section 6. And if we scroll down, you'll notice that there's this section in here that's called OGL conversion. And this is the whole section that talks about what you could and couldn't publish if you decided to use this license. If you were going to use this license and publish fourth edition stuff, you couldn't publish third edition stuff with it. You couldn't have product lines that were both third edition and fourth edition. You basically had to make that choice of what you wanted to publish. So this is the one that got people all up in arms, all these publishers that looked at this and said, this is no good. We cannot work under these conditions. And basically, if that's the case, then we're going to go and just publish our own stuff. This is kind of what leads to Paizo making Pathfinder, because they already got cut out and they lost their license to do the Dungeon magazine and the Dragon magazine. And now you're basically telling them that if they decide to do fourth edition, they're only going to be able to do fourth edition, but they already had a really good following for third edition. So they wanted to keep publishing third edition. And so the solution for them was, well, then we'll just make our own game. And they start working on Pathfinder. So they saw all that stuff coming down the road, and they started working on Pathfinder. And Pathfinder comes out in 2009. So it's a year later that Pathfinder finally comes out. But you can see how this is something that led to that as soon as Wizards tried to start pulling that back. Now, if you look over in the newer license that was released, and we get to what would be Section 6, Section 6 is different. Section 6 in here is called Quality and Content Standards, which is actually Section 7 in the original one. They essentially cut out Section 6. They took Section 6 from that original version of the game license and just got rid of it. And they completely cut it out, so everything kind of shifted. So there's still a Section 6 in here, but you can see that everything just shifted up, and now it's the Quality and Content Standards. And honestly, everything else in the license is basically the same. So you go Quality and Content Standards, compliance with laws, right to review, and you get the same thing. Compliance with laws, right to review, proprietary rights. It's really the same. The Section 6 is the piece that they pulled out, and that was the piece that really was going to restrict what people could do. So without that section in this license, you now have the freedom to publish whatever you want. You can publish fourth edition stuff. You can also publish third edition stuff under the open game license. You can have the same content available for both. You publish your third edition stuff under the open game license. You publish your fourth edition stuff under the game system license, and you're all good. So by removing that, they solved that problem. Unfortunately, by this point, it was almost too late. It was out there. People are upset about it. They'd already made their decisions that they were going to like stick with the open game license. And so it was too late. You know, it was out there and there was really nothing they could do about it, which is, you know, unfortunate. You know, if they had just not put that in there from the beginning, you know, maybe things go a little bit differently. But just as they had done last year when they tried to get a little more restrictive with the open game license, people got up in arms, and back with 4th edition, it was too much. So right off the bat, that license that they're trying to push out, you know, 2 weeks after the game comes out, and it already was just going to be a real deal killer for a lot of people. So, but the rest of this license is pretty straightforward. It's really a lot of the same stuff that we see in the open game license. It's much more wordy. It goes into a lot more detail about who owns what and what you can do if you want to, if you have a disagreement on stuff and all that thing, and really trying to separate saying that if you're publishing 4th edition stuff over here, you are not doing that under the authorization of Wizards. Wizards is not approving your content or anything. You are simply using this license to do it. And so really Wizards all this verbiage on here is designed so that Wizards can, one, make sure that they maintain ownership of the stuff that they should maintain ownership of, while also separating themselves from any content that the community creates so that they're not subject to any lawsuits if you make some content that causes problems. So it's very wordy. You know, open game license, 2 pages. This one is 7 pages. Even the more streamlined one is still 7 pages. When you look through these, like I said, except for that section 6, they're basically the same document, just with slight variations. So that's the key difference between the 2 licenses. And the license that we're really looking at is this one over here on the right hand side. That's the one that is currently active. So this one that had section 6 in it, that's not an active license anymore. That license went away when the new license came out in February of 2009. The other thing I want to point out in the license that's interesting is that section 5.2 in both of them has the text that you need to include in your content. And so with the open game license, you have to include the open game license in anything that you publish. You have to actually put those 2 pages worth of text into your content. And if you look at like the Pathfinder books, not the recent ones, but the original ones, and Dungeon Crawl Classics and Castles and Crusades, you will find those that open game license in there. Every single Pathfinder module that was published has the open game license in it. The interesting thing is that it's usually tucked away in the back somewhere, and usually a really small font that may even be kind of hard to read. Wizards clearly didn't like that because they're much more clear on what they want you to do with this. This is the text that you have to include, which you'll note is a much smaller piece of text. The open game license is a full 2 pages worth of text. This only has this small piece of text that you have to do, which is really just 2 paragraphs of stuff. But it does make it clear that you have to put it within the first 3 pages of your document, and it has to be at least in a 10-point font. So clearly they didn't like the fact that when like Paizo and the other publishers took their open game license and they put it in there, that they were tucking it away way in the back of the book and using the super small font so they could be compliant with having it in there, but nobody could really even see it and read it if they wanted to. So it was, pretty out of the way. Here, Wizards is saying, no, we don't want that. We want you to make sure you're calling this out. So it's got to be in the first 3 pages, and you got to use at least a 10-point font. So I thought that was interesting. But I do like the fact that in this license, this text is only like 2 paragraphs. So it's not going to take up a ton of room in your book or module or whatever you're publishing. So it's really not that big of a deal to put this out there. So there you go. That's the license itself and what you're working with. And on the surface, what you're really looking at here is the same type of stuff that's in the open game license. It is much more wordy. It's probably because of all those words. It probably does make it a little scarier to use, and a little more restrictive just in the details. But the gist of everything on here is really the same as the open game license. It's essentially telling you what you can do and what you have access to, and separating the ownership and making sure that it's clear who owns what and what to do if there's a disagreement and how you comply and all that sort of stuff. So it's really basically the same stuff you get with the open game license. I don't feel that the license itself is the problem when it comes to the 4th edition stuff and making content. I don't think it's the license that's the problem, because really it's not too much different from the open game license in what it's spelling out for you. There are a couple things that are interesting, I think. In order to use this license, you have to submit a statement of agreement. And that is, so I have those somewhere up here. There we go. So there's 2 forms. There's a statement of agreement on the left, and that is what you have to fill out with all of your information, and you have to mail it in to Wizards of the Coast to let them know that you are planning to make content and comply with the game system license. So you put all your information in, you mail it off to this PO box, and then if you don't hear back from them within 2 weeks after they receive it, then you're free to go. You can go ahead and start making your content. Now, unless you have tracked the package or anything, you don't really know when they've received it. But if you've sent it and you don't hear a response from them in 2 weeks or so, then you're good. You are now registered and you can start making content using the game system license. On the right side is the termination notice, and this one's kind of weird. It says basically if you decide you're going to stop making content for 4th edition under the terms of this license, you have to send them this form and tell them that you will no longer be making content under 4th edition. You then have to sell off your inventory. I think there might even be a restriction on how long you have in order to sell off your inventory. And then you're done. And then, so basically you have to tell them when you're going to start using the license, and you have to tell them when you're going to stop using the license. And it's all through this form. There's no online thing to do it. You have to do it through this form. And you mail it in, and that's that. So in some ways, I equate this to kind of DM's Guild. With DM's Guild, you get access to more stuff on DM's Guild if you do that, but you can only sell through DM's Guild, and and you have to put a logo on there on your products and things like that. So that registration process on DM's Guild is really the equivalent of you sending in this form. So, nowadays, if they were doing something like this, they'd certainly put something on D&D Beyond or something like that. So, it's just a little weird. You had to actually mail something in. So, but as I mentioned that, with DM's Guild, you have a logo that you have to put on all of your products that you're doing. And actually you have the same thing here. Any product that you make in accordance with this license, you have to put a logo on it. And so like on the front page, and I think you may be on the back page if it's a PDF version, a digital copy, there's a logo you have to put in there. So it has to show that to indicate that this is a 4th edition product, and it requires the use of these books, so you can see what it has on there, which I think is really interesting. I like that you actually get to use the D&D logo. It's not something that you don't really get to do in other ways. So 4th edition gave you this logo that you would use to indicate that this is compatible with 4th edition, and here's some other books. And so you essentially put that on the cover of your book or inside the cover. There were some rules about where it goes, but so again, similar to DM's Guild, where you have to put the DM's Guild logo on there. And, so about, similar type of stuff. There's nothing really to get too up in arms over that. So, and one other thing is once they changed this license, and they come out with a new version, they obviously needed to to try to smooth things over. So they did put out an FAQ document that goes through some of the specifics of what you have to do and tries to convert the license into language that people would actually understand. So you get this FAQ that's out there as well. And in here, it actually specifically mentions the logo that you have to use and where that logo has to be. I'm trying to look at it to see, maybe it's in the license itself where it says specifically where it has to go. Oh no, there it is. It has to be in the lower third of the legal page and the lower left quadrant of the back cover for physical products. For downloadable ones, it has to be in the lower left quadrant. So there's some rules about where you put that logo as well, and those are answered in the FAQ. But that's just to kind of clarify what some of the details. And this FAQ document's actually pretty long. It goes into quite a bit of detail for to help you understand the changes that they made to it. So So at this point, what we have here is a license that, to me, seems similar to the open game license. It's more wordy. You've got the scary thing with that section 6 that they then removed. But the final one that they published actually is a license that you could use to publish 4th edition content. And from a license perspective, it seems fine. It seems at least on par with what I see from the open game license. It seems similar to what I've seen from licenses from other companies that are licensing their product out. There's nothing in the actual version of the license that was released that is a concern. I think it's a workable license the way it is. It's not perfect by any means. I certainly would have liked something different, but it's also not awful. But it's not all good news. So that's the license itself. Really what we have to do is we have to look at the SRD itself. So this license, as with the open game license, it allows you to use the system reference document for 4th edition, just as the open game license allows you to use the system reference document for 5th edition or for 3rd edition. This license is just giving you permission to use the SRD. So we got to look at the SRD, and that's where things get a little meh. So the SRD for 4th edition is much more restrictive than the other SRDs that we have. There's 2 parts to this that make it more restrictive. The first is that there's no actual real content in this SRD. If you look at the SRD for 5th edition, what you find is that you have a lot of content. You have classes, you have races, you have spells, you have magic items, you have monsters, and you get the full definition of them. You get monster stat blocks. You can look up a goblin and get all the stats for the goblin, and you can look up a barbarian and get the stats for the barbarian and things like that. All that stuff is in there, and the license, the open game license, is giving you permission to use those things. So, you can see that you get all this nice information, the details spelled out for you, and you can use all of that stuff is now available for you to use in your content. The SRD for 4th edition is not like that. And I'll quickly scroll through a few of the pages so you can kind of see what's in this SRD. And you'll notice that what it looks like is more a table of contents, an index. You get the names of things, but you don't actually get the meaning of them. You get, so like here's the wizard powers, and you get light, you get mage hand, you get prestidigitation, but what you don't get is, what is prestidigitation? What is mage hand? How do they work? What is that power? And as you get further down into, here's the different skills, but you don't really get what they mean. Here's the feats, but what do they mean? You get down, and eventually you'll get down into monsters, and but it's just the names of the monsters. Here's magic items, and but what does that magic item do? And that's the key thing that's missing from this SRD, is it doesn't have the content. It doesn't have the definition. It looks more like an index of things. So what can you do with that? And the answer is that their expectation is that when you create a module, and if you're making an adventure module, say, and you have like monsters, that you would simply refer to the monster, and then you would put a citation in there that would say, see monster manual, see player's handbook 2, something like that, whatever it is, whatever the reference is. So you would just have the name of the monster, and then you would put the reference to the book that it's in. The idea being that then the person who uses your module would need to go buy that book, and so therefore they can kind of profit off of those purchases. So I get the idea. And honestly, coming from, 5th edition, when you make a module in 5th edition, it usually just indicates that there's 3 goblins, and it doesn't give you the stat blocks for the goblins. It just says there's 3 goblins. So you would go get the book where the goblins are, and you would look up the stat block for a goblin, and that's how you would run that. One of the nice things with 4th edition, though, is that the encounters were set up where the stat blocks for the monsters were listed with the encounter. So if you had an encounter with goblins, it would say that you had this certain number of goblins, and the stat block for the goblins would be right there. So you didn't have to go to any other page, any other book. But with the way this SRD is set up, you can't do that because you're not allowed to print the stat block for a goblin. All you get in this SRD is the fact that there's a goblin, or it'll be, more specifically, it'd be a goblin skirmisher or a goblin artillery, something like that. It would refer to a monster that's in the monster manual, but you couldn't put the stat block for that monster in your module. You would have to just refer to it, and then you could say, see monster manual, and then send them over there. Now, you could make your own goblin, and one of the nice things that is in this, and I'm going to scroll really fast here, so I apologize for that, but you can see that it gives you the template for these things. So you can actually use the trade dress for some of these powers and monsters and spells and everything. So, with the same colors and the same fonts and keywords, and it even has the icons in here. So you could actually use these and make monster stat blocks that match the style that you would get in an official 4th edition book, which is kind of nice. You don't get that with 5th edition. You can't, officially use the stylings that they have. But 4th edition in this SRD, they're actually giving you that. But what you would have to do is you would have to make your own goblin. You couldn't make a goblin, that sounds just like a goblin, let's go look and see what goblins they have just for fun. So here's they've got goblin sharpshooters, goblin warriors, goblin blackblade, goblin cutters. So these are all the different goblins, and these are all in the monster manual. So if you wanted to make a goblin, you'd have to give it some different name. So you couldn't call it a goblin cutter. You'd have to call it something else. And then you'd have to give it your own stats. You'd have to make up your own stats. You're essentially building a new monster, and you could put that stat block in, because now you can use the template that they've given you for a monster, and you've made your own monster, and you can put that in here. But if you were going to use one from the monster manual, all you could do is just refer to the fact that it's in the monster manual. Again, that's what 5th edition does. You don't get the stat blocks in 5th edition. It just tells you how many monsters you have. But 4th edition was different, and so that would be a step backwards if you're really trying to emulate the style of 4th edition. So that's one issue that you have, is that this is it's an index, and you get access to use the terms, and you get access to use the monsters and the names of the powers and things like that, which is fine. And that's helpful for the case of skills, where, the skills in 4th edition are different from 5th edition and the other editions. So by having access to those terms, it allows you to make content that uses those terms. But then we get into the larger problem with this. And honestly, I think all of that so far has been fairly workable. You could do something with that. But there's one part of this that is a problem. And I feel like this is the piezo effect of this license. If you recall, when 3rd edition came out and they had the open game license and they put it out there, and then you ended up with games like Dungeon Crawl Classics and Castles and Crusades. Even 13th Age uses that license and the 3rd edition rules. And then of course Pathfinder used that license and that SRD to make Pathfinder. What they did not want you to do here was use this to make your own game. Very clearly, and the reason that I can say that is because on this page, page 2 of the SRD, is this piece of text, and it very clearly says that you cannot redefine any of the terms that are listed here in this SRD. So when you get into this SRD and there's a definition of a term like a critical hit or the athletics skill as it uses in the example, or an at-will power or an extended rest, it's giving you access to that term, but it's very clearly stating that you cannot redefine that term. So I couldn't use this SRD as the foundation for my own game. I couldn't make a game where I then change the meaning of what the athletic skill does, or change the meaning of a critical hit, or change the meaning of an at-will power. They're very clearly restricting you on that. And that can be a problem, because if you're trying to make something, use this to do some more advanced things, and you kind of want to redefine some of those things, you want to homebrew some of this stuff and make your own version of it, you are explicitly forbidden from doing that. And that may not be a problem for some folks, but it also could be. I could see it being a big problem for others, and that really drives home the point of the 4th edition SRD. And really, the biggest limiting factor in it is that this is not an SRD like we think. This is simply an index of terms that we're allowed to use. But these terms all refer back to definitions that exist inside the official documents, and we are expected to always refer people back to those official documents in order to get the definition of these terms, and we are highly restricted in what we can do with them. We must use these terms in the way that they were intended as per those official documents. So what does that mean? So here we are. So having taken this journey, and I've been talking for a long time, I know about this, and I don't know who's hung in there with me. I find it very interesting because all this is part of the story that was D&D 4th edition and what happened with it. So I really find it pretty interesting. And I can see why, even after removing Section 6 that was so problematic, the SRD that they have for 4th edition is not as useful as the SRDs for 3.5 and for 5th edition. Having access to the terms, though, is helpful because bloodied, at-will powers, encounter powers, all these things are things that are specific to 4th edition, and it's really hard if you're trying to make content for a module that lives into 4th edition and you can't use those terms, then that would be a problem. And I've tried to use different terms for those things, but it's kind of like you're just kind of working around the thing. But using this SRD would allow you to do that. And as long as you're not redefining those terms, you can have at it. My conclusion of this is that this license is fine. It's not ideal. It's not great, but it's also not so unworkable that you couldn't do anything with it. And here's the thing is that, if we go back and we look at the forms that we had to fill out, I did it. I went ahead and did it. I filled out the statement of acceptance form. I put in all my information and I sent it off to the PO box that's listed on there, and I sent it. And the rule was that if you don't hear anything back within 14 days of them receiving it, then that means you are good to go and you can start making content using this license. Well, two things. That PO box is still owned by Wizards of the Coast. I did some research and found that PO box is the PO box that they still use for things that you need to send to Wizards of the Coast. It's used for Magic the Gathering stuff. So it is still a valid Wizards of the Coast PO box. Whether the attention to that you have to list there means anything to them anymore, I don't know. But if you mail something to that PO box, it's going to go to Wizards of the Coast. And I did. I sent it to them. That was 2 months ago, and I have not heard anything back from them. Ergo, per the terms of the game system license, that is implied approval for me to make 4th edition content using this SRD and the terms of the game system license, which I intend to do. I am going to take this and I'm going to live into the terms of the game system license. And my next module that I'm currently working on, I am going to make that module in accordance with these rules. There may be monsters that I use where I just refer to the monster manual. And then in other cases, I will make new monsters and I will follow the terms of this SRD. But I now have the freedom, by having submitted this form and agreed to conform to this license, which I could find no indication that this license has been revoked, and I received no word indicating that I couldn't proceed. I will live into the terms and conditions of this, and we'll see how it goes. I will publish it out there when it's available, and I will make my first actual 4th edition module, and we'll see how that turns out. So once I get farther into that, maybe I'll have more information and we'll see what happens. But that's pretty much where this is at, and kind of what I wanted to share. So if I had to give my overall impressions here, the game system license itself is not awful. It's not great. It's not as good as the open game license, but it's not terrible. It's not unusable. It's just more detailed. And I think if that license was made More recently, they would have done it differently. But at the time they had some intentions and they wanted to be very specific. They wanted to really accomplish something. They got some pushback, so they pulled that piece out. But the license that's out there, most of the stuff in there that I see is pretty on par with what you would see in other licenses. There's nothing that's too crazy. I like the fact that the text that you have to put in your document is much smaller than the text you have to do for the open game license. Now, not as small as with the Creative Commons. That obviously is hardly any text, but the open game license is full 2 pages that you can kind of squeeze down into one if you had to. This text is much smaller, just a couple paragraphs. Even with the restrictions of the size and where you put it, it's not a big deal. I like the fact that you actually get a logo that you can put on there that says this is 4th edition content, and you can sell this content anywhere you want. I'm not restricted to having to sell this at only through DM's Guild or something. I can sell this content wherever I want. So I can make actual official 4th edition or official licensed 4th edition content. And I put this logo on it and I put the text on there and I'm good to go. I like the fact that in the SRD, I get access to all of the key terms that I need, and it covers a lot of material, because this is covering material from not just the player's handbook. Unlike the SRD for 5th edition and 3rd edition, you're kind of getting a basic rules type view of it. So you don't have all the classes, you don't have all the races, you get a good number of monsters and things like that, but it is a scaled down version. This is pretty complete for everything that had been released at the time that this SRD was published in 2009. So you have stuff from not just the first player's handbook and not just the first monster manual, you have it from the other player's handbooks and monster manual as well as from like the Adventurer's Vault. So there's a lot of content in there. Granted, it's just the names of the stuff. So you can have the name of the item. And I don't think it's that big of a deal to just use the name of the item or the name of the monster, and leave it to the person running it to look up those things. If I'm going to use something from the core books, I'll just use the reference to it and let them, just like you do with 5th edition, you let people look it up in the right book. And I can even add the citation that says which book it's in. I don't think that's a big deal. I was hoping that I could kind of create my own game or a version of 4th edition that kind of merges 4th edition and 5th edition. That was my project 5.4 that I was trying to do. This license explicitly will not allow me to do that. I cannot use the stuff. I cannot redefine the terms from 4th edition to make something like that. So that is a restriction, but I'm okay with that, because my main thing is I wanted to make 4th edition modules, and this will let me do that. So, all right. There's the whole thing. That's the whole shebang. I know I ramble, I go on, and I did that here because this was a lot to talk about. And I don't know if anybody else found it interesting. I find it interesting from both a content creator perspective and from a 4th edition history perspective. I find it interesting, and it was a fun journey for me to dig into this stuff. If you want to look at any of these documents yourself, I got them all from the Wayback Machine. I went back to 2008 and 2009 and 10 and 11 and 12. And I looked back to find all the most recent versions of all these documents, and I got them on my website. So if you go down to in the description and you go to my website, you will find a section on my website that has all of these documents on there, and you can download them. It's an unofficial archive. This is not where you should go if you want official documents. I would recommend the Wayback Machine because they don't exist on Wizard's website, but the Wayback Machine will have them from the historical archives. But I've got the most recent versions out there if you want to take a look at them and just have a peek. Again, none of this is official legal advice on anything. All I'm telling you is my interpretation and what I plan to do and how I see things. So, but let me know your thoughts. Put them in the comments. I'm very interested to see what you have to say about this. What have you tried to do game system license stuff? Have you tried to do any 4th edition content? Did you try to send in the form? Anything like that? Let me know. I want to hear about it. And I will keep everybody posted on how I do getting my 4th edition module out there, and see what happens with it. And we'll just see how it goes and take it from there. So it was a journey. That was that was a lot to talk about. I hope it was informative, if not enjoyable. And I will see what else we have to talk about next time. But until then, take care.